All right, so now we have finished doing our setup. Our LTI tool is running. It's accessible from a Learn environment. So now we're ready to get started with the tutorial portion, where we are going to take this LTI tool and are going to transform it into an Ultra Extension Framework application. And so I wanted to start here in GitHub before we get to the actual code, and just talk a little bit about how we have set things up. So if you hit this drop down that lists all the branches, you can see we have a number of these. So the master branch is basically what we worked with in getting set up. This is the default LTI tool. And so we've broken the rest of these steps down into a few manageable pieces. So the first branch you see, LTI to UEF, this is going to be transforming the way that the LTI launch is handled so that it can become a valid Ultra Extension Framework placement. We'll then get to the second part where we're going to take what we've built in step one, and we are going to use the JavaScript capabilities that we have in order to set up a message channel to authorize our application with the Ultra Extension Framework and to subscribe to the events that we want to listen for. In the third part, we're going to take that and build upon it the ability to open a panel. And this panel is going to open when you hit a specific course, and not just a specific course, but a specific content item within that course. And then the last piece is a little bit smaller, but it's super powerful, and that's the implementation of local storage. And what this allows us to do is set up communication between Ultra, our hidden iframe that's running our message channel, and the rest of our application. So we can pass messages back from within our application and request things to happen in the Ultra Extension Framework. And it doesn't have to happen right there in that integration JavaScript that we're going to be running. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. So I don't know how familiar everybody is with Git. Everybody uses their own particular brand or favorite code repository, but we're using GitHub, so obviously we're going to have to use Git. And so because we're using a number of branches, I just want to touch briefly on how to check out a remote branch. And so we're always going to start off with git fetch origin, and what this does is it informs our local environment of all of the remote branches that are available. And then basically all we have to do is go ahead and check that out. And so we can say git checkout -b, we can specify our branch name, and then we specify our remote branch name. And this automatically takes care of Git behind the scenes and sets up our local branch so that when we check in our code or make changes, it's automatically tracked by the same branch remotely. So that's what we're going to be using today. And we only have to do git fetch origin once because we will be using the same project for the duration of our tutorial. So with that said, let's go to our IDE. And I'm using Visual Studio Code because it's my favorite. Much like code repositories, everybody has their favorite IDE, and so feel free to use whatever you like. But for this tutorial, I will be using Visual Studio Code. And so here we are. We are in our project. And you can see all of our files are here. And this is all the stuff where we left it when we finished setting up our environment and testing. And so the first thing that we need to do is go ahead and get that remote branch. So let's say git fetch origin. And now if I say git branch -a to show me all local and remote, you can see we have master, which is what we've been using, and then you can see all of the remote origins, and you can see that the remote origin head is pointed toward origin master, which is the branch that we have checked out. But we need to get that first one there, the 1-LTI-2-UEF. And so we are going to say git checkout -b for branch 1-LTI-2-UEF space, and then origin /1-LTI-2-UEF. And so when I hit enter, if you look over onto the left-hand side where our project files are, you'll see that they will change. So let's go ahead and hit that. And so now we've switched branches. You can see it's refreshed my project over here, and now I have the second portion. And so let's just take a look at what is different. So let me minimize our terminal here. and pull up the code. And let's actually move this over here and give us a little bit more space. So what we had before was most of this was already in place. So we have all of our LTI bits that we need, but we have here our default route that we use to test that our Docker's session is running as we expected and that ngrok is working as we expected. And here's our login, and this is exactly the same as we used for LTI. So there are absolutely no changes in our OIDC login. And then here's our launch. And if you look at this and compare it to the previous branch, there's also no differences in this code. Everything that we're doing here is exactly the same as we were doing in the straight LTI launch. We are then getting our authorization code, and with the authorization code, we were again doing this exactly the same way that we are doing our LTI launch, but instead of rendering our hello world.html, we're actually rendering index.html. Why is that, do you think? Well, let's take a look. So let me open up my code and let's take a look at index.html and see what it's actually doing. So index.html, not much to it, right? So you take a look at this and you can see it is a basic HTML page and it is set up like a basic HTML page, but here you can see we're adding the script. And the script is called static UEF-integration.js. Now for my purposes, I'm going to change this so that the tutorial works because I already have a file called UEF-integration.js, and so when we go to look at things as they're running in the JavaScript console, it'll be easier if this is called something different. So we'll just call it tutorial.integration.js. And so let's go ahead, before I forget, and change the name of this file to tutorial-integration.js. And so we're not doing a whole lot in this JavaScript. Basically what you see is we are checking to see if we are in an iframe, and if we're not, we're throwing an error. But this is super important because what we're actually doing in this code is when we create our Ultra extension placement, it's going to launch to our application when the user logs in. So this is all happening behind the scenes automatically as part of the login process. And so it's doing an LTI launch, it's verifying that the LTI launch is valid, and it's getting a token for that user. A little bit later on in the next video, when we set up our message channel, you'll see how we use that token to actually authorize this iframe and this JavaScript to act on behalf of the user that's logged in. So pretty cool, easy way using existing learned technologies in order to authorize and authenticate our application to act on behalf of the user. So that's really all there is to it. The last change I'm going to make is we're going to change this to 5,000 and save it and make sure that I saved it. I did. So now we're at the step where let's go ahead and test this out, right? So we'll bring back up our terminal and we'll go ahead and clear it. And let's take care of our Docker bit. So we'll say Docker build -t, and we'll tag it as UEF tutorial, and we'll give it version 0.2 and period to tell it where the Docker file is. And so now we're building, and you can see most of it's being built from cache because there's not a whole lot of differences between this file and the one that we created in step 1 with version 0.1. And so now we need to go ahead and run it. So Docker run -p, and we'll take port 5000 from the from within the Docker container, and we'll forward it to port 5000 on my laptop. We'll give it a friendly name, UEF tutorial 2. And then we just point it at our tag. So now we're saying run this image that we just created as a container called UEF tutorial 2, and make sure that port 5000 is accessible from the host. So we'll go ahead and run it, and you can see we are now running. So let's take a look at our Docker desktop, and you can see, yes, we have UEF tutorial 2. You can see that we still have UEF tutorial version 0.1, which was what we built in the getting started section. And so now we have this running. So let's see if we get what we're expecting. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at our ngrok, and let's launch this in a browser. Your Docker container is successfully being served by ngrok from your desktop. So what we essentially have is the basis for an Ultra extension framework integration running on our desktop. So let's check out our Learn instance, and we'll go to admin, and we'll go back to LTI tool providers, and we'll hit our UEF tutorial. And notice I didn't have to change anything at all in the registration for this application. It's going to use the exact same launch URL as we saw. So let's go to manage placements, and let's go ahead and create our placement, and we'll call it UEF tutorial Ultra extension. And we'll give it a unique handle. Remember, this handle has to be unique across this system, so you can't have more than one placement with the same handle. And that's because it uses it in the database, so it's got to be unique. So we'll just call it UEF tutorial Ultra extension. We've got availability set to yes, and if you remember in the LTI tool, we set it up as a course content tool, and in this case we're going to go ahead and select Ultra extension. Make sure you do not select launch a new window, because this is meant to launch automatically and not take the user anywhere. And you don't need to specify an icon, because nobody will ever see this or be able to launch it themselves manually. And now we just need to have our tool provider. And again, this is going to be the exact same tool provider we use for our LTI tool. So let me grab my ngrok endpoint. We'll copy that, and we will paste. And then we'll say launch. And then we'll click submit. And now we have an Ultra extension placement. So to see this work, we are going to close the administrator panel. Let's go ahead and open up our JavaScript console. And so you can see we've already got some Ultra extension framework things running here. You can see UEF integration. This was from the DevCon version of this tutorial that we gave, and that's why I wanted to change it to a different name. So we'll go ahead and sign out, and then we will sign back in, and we'll watch over here and see what happens. So there is our UEF integration. Here's the launch. Where is our... Let's filter to... Okay, so here we have our tutorial integration. So this was loaded. If we look in it, you can see it is exactly the same code that we just saw. And so now our LTI tool is now an Ultra extension framework placement, and we are running JavaScript in a hidden iframe that lives within the Ultra UI. And so now we're ready to actually get to the fun part where we start to make it do stuff.